to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. We're so excited. I'm going to give a few announcements before we actually start the content because I don't want anyone to miss the content, and we've got about 300 people coming on, so it's just going to take a couple minutes for us to cycle in. So first of all, I want to welcome you. I'm Christy Belt-Grossman. For those of you who I don't know, I am the CEO of Ops Boss Coaching, and I think we have a number of our coaches on the call as well. And I want to welcome you to what we normally do in our private closed Facebook group. We do Coffee with Christy once a month with a guest speaker. And this guest speaker I was so excited about that I think everyone I know in my whole world should listen to her, not just my coaching clients, but my family. I have my family on the call, everybody. It's not just business. While we're waiting for people to pop on, I just wanted to give you a couple of announcements. So number one, if you are working on your growth plan and you are an operations person, actually, why don't you guys go ahead and let's get the chat going. And if you guys would type in the chat and tell me, are you on a real estate team? Are you in a private business? Are you a family member? And what is your role on in your business or on your team? Go ahead and let's get the chat box going so we can see who's on the call. For those of you who are on the operations side, and you're working on your growth plan for 2021, I want to make sure that you know that we have Systems Are Sexy coming up in January and March with the most amazing Stephanie Brackett. So if you're looking to build the systems on your team, she's going to teach you the behind the scenes, what you need to think about before you even start building your systems. And then she'll actually build some systems with you. Second class we have coming up in January is Be a Boss, 10 Secrets of a Mega EA. I know a lot of our clients have already taken that. If you have not taken that, this is for rainmakers and for anyone on the operations side of teams. It's the 10 secrets that I'm going to share with you behind the scenes when I was part of the team that was one of the first teams nationally to do $1 billion in sales. So I'll share that with you. And then on your growth plan, if you are an operations leader on a team, not a brand new admin, but an operations leader, you're going to want to put October 8th through 10 for the Ops Boss Leader Retreat. It's a once a year, 3-day retreat for operations leaders only in the Washington, D.C. area. And then last opportunity, coming up in January, I happen to be on the board for the National Association of Real Estate Support Professionals, and they're putting together an incredible conference called Empower 2021 with speakers on the transaction side, on the operations side. We have Adam Hergenrother and Hallie Warner who will be speaking. Margaret Smith will be speaking. Amanda Dahl. These are industry thought leaders that you are going to want to hear from, as well as people like Stephanie Brackett. So that is, I don't remember the dates. I think it's January 15 through 17. Maybe one of you guys can put that in the chat box, narespconference.com. And if one of you guys could put in the chat box also the opsbosscoaching.com link for the events page, that would be awesome. And I'm with that, I think we've got about everybody on the call at this point. I would love to introduce you to this speaker. So let me tell you, I had the amazing opportunity to facilitate a panel a couple weeks ago in the Messy Middle Mastermind. They did a cultural summit, and each day of the summit they had a keynote speaker, and this person who I had never heard of named Nora Simpson was on that call and was the keynote speaker, and in 15 minutes blew my mind to the point that if you are my coaching client, I talked about her on every call for the next 2 weeks. So I want to tell you about Nora. Let's see. First of all, she's author of the book, Get Ahead and Stay Ahead, Use the Secrets of Your Own Brain to Unleash Your Success at Work. She has coached and presented to, I don't know, she gave me the numbers. I think it was like 500 companies in 80+ industries in 5 continents. She's coached over 200 real estate agents and teams, spoken to people like Merrill Lynch, Columbia Business School. So obviously, I don't need to tell you any more about her credentials. I am not a science person. I will tell you on a personal side that one of the things that struck me about Nora as I got to know her preparing for this call today is that she walks the talk. She happens to live in Manhattan, 5 blocks away from Central Park. Her husband is a doctor in a psychiatric hospital, and her family had COVID, I think she said in March. And I have never talked to a more positive person. So she is walking the talk of using what's happening in your brain to change how you look at life. And I really loved that about her. One of the things that blew my mind, and maybe Nora, you're going to talk about this today, I'm not sure because I haven't seen your presentation, but one of the things that blew my mind in that mastermind a couple weeks ago was talking about distractions and how distracted we all get and how much we distract each other, but even more than that, how much we distract ourselves, and that there's an actual chemical reason behind it. I am not a scientist. I'm going to let Nora tell you about this. But basically that the chemical our brain produces is the same chemical when we distract ourselves. It feels good. It's the same chemical that heroin addicts produce when they do heroin. And that's why we distract ourselves so much. So I thought, oh, holy cow, what can we do about this? So I'm going to let Nora take this away from at this point and tell us what the heck do we do about this distraction problem and what is this distraction problem? And thank you, Nora, so much for presenting. Really happy to have you.
Christy, thank you so much. Your introduction was so delicious. I'll be paying you your commission later. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It's true. New York shut down, I think it was March 13th, and my husband came down with his fever on like March 18th. And then I got symptoms and my 2 little boys got symptoms, and we really got to feel the fear. You know, we really got that front row experience of this pandemic. And it was very scary at the time, and we can talk about it offline when we're all done talking about distractions. But I am actually very grateful for the experience because a lot of really good things came out of it, and I'm continuing, you know, to learn and grow from discomfort, you know, forever. And that's one of the great joys of my life. And I think that as we talk about overcoming distractions and how overcoming distractions can be really uncomfortable, you know, we'll talk about how important and fundamental the role of discomfort is in understanding how we transform our behavior around these issues. So I thank you guys so much for being here. I am overwhelmed with honor that there are 186 people here who want to overcome their distractions. And you know, we'll be talking a little later in the hour about the fact that Christy actually and I have a mutual friend who's already done one of my neuroscience productivity boot camps. They're 3 to 6 weeks long, and we do really double productivity in about 3 to 6 weeks, which is so much fun. So I'm just going to kind of dive into, like, first a little bit of an overview for you. I love that everybody was posting about their backgrounds and, you know, their role on the team and everything. Feel free to put questions in the chat. I might miss them because I get a little excited, but I'm going to ask Sheila and Elizabeth and Christy to monitor the chat. And if there's a question that comes up, I love questions. And what I said to Christy before she let you all in was, you know, I love people's brains. So, like, when I see people disagreeing or having a question or whatever, I'm like, oh, that means, you know, things are happening, right? Like, they're actually awake and they're engaging. So there's no such thing as a bad question. There's no such thing as a rude question. Like, you ask whatever you want, and I'm here for you, okay? I'm told, as my 5-year-old would say, I'm here for you. I'm here for you, okay? So let's get started. I'm excited. So the first thing you should know is that we're more stressed out than we've ever been. And the American Psychological Association takes, and this is before COVID, these numbers are pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID is leading to an extreme spike in stress and mental health issues. But even before COVID hit, you know, back in March, there is this 15-year J-curve that shows that Americans are just getting more and more stressed out, especially as it relates to work. We're finding work to be a higher and higher source of stress. The bottom line of that change is that it used to be that about 40% of Americans felt stressed about their work. By the late teens, it was closer to 60% of Americans, consistently reported feelings of stress about the workplace. So what's going on? Why the sudden uptick over the last, 10 to 20 years? And I'm going to invite you to consider that technology has really reshaped our workplace in a major way. I know a lot of you don't remember life before email, but in point of fact, it existed. And there are all these workplace cultural expectations and practices that evolved over the last, let's say, 100 years that got completely disrupted as we saw the introduction of email and then instant messaging and then smartphones and then apps and Facebook and social media and oh my gosh. And here what's happened is we've seen this true reshaping of the American brain. It starts in the workplace because that's the first place email shows up. It shows up at workplaces even before it shows up in home Gmail accounts, that kind of thing. And what we've seen is that it really took till about 2005 for the research community to catch on to the fact that people's behavior was measurably different thanks to technology. And if you look just at the studies from 2005 to, pre-COVID, and I do have some preliminary data that's coming out now about COVID and COVID's effect, and it's all terrible. So feel positive, but know that it's a tough time, right? But just 2005 through pre-COVID, we just see this radical increase in disruption and inefficiency and this radical decrease in lost productivity. So in 2005, the estimate was that people were losing about 2 hours per day to interruptions caused by email and other technological distractions. The estimate is that nowadays, if I lump it all together and take an average, I can very easily, confidently assert that almost every American is losing 4 to 6 hours per day of productivity, not just from the interruptions of email and the dinging of the phone and everything else, but also just from the way that our brains have become retrained by all of the interruptions. And we'll talk about what that looks like biologically later. And don't worry, we'll even talk about a few tips and tricks for solving it, even though I'll be honest with you, it's those 3 to 6 week boot camps that are really the time when we transform. Does anybody have any questions for me? I see that there's little thingies showing up in the chat, but I haven't actually looked at the chat.
No, that was me just typing. I was just thinking, 4 to 6 hours a day we're losing. So if we can overcome that, imagine how the quality of life of our own lives and everyone around us would change.
Yeah, it's powerful. It can be really, really powerful. So I think we all have more or less a working understanding of how distracting, the little flags from email can be. But I also want to help you understand some of the most fascinating research around this topic as it relates to the shifts in our communication behavior that have nothing to do with smartphones or computers. So one of my favorite researchers in this area is a woman named Gloria Mark. She does a lot of research into business practice and business behavior out at UC Irvine. And her research shows us that American office workers experience an interruption wholly related to their current task every 7 to 9 minutes minimum. These are numbers that are based on research from 2008 to 2012. So I think it's more frequent now. But, I'm going with what I can show data to reflect. The average length of time before we get interrupted by a colleague. So not the dinging of the phone, not the momentary 2-second or 5-second interruption, but just an actual person calling us up or walking into the office and saying, hey, quick question for you, right? Like, hey, I just need you for 5 minutes, right? The average time we get to work on a project before a colleague interrupts us is about 7.8 minutes. Not a lot, right? And I think it's shorter now. The average time we spend before we complete a task, meaning how long we can work till we get to task completion, is about 8.4 minutes. Why 8.4 minutes? Well, it turns out it's really hard for us to work past 8.6 minutes. because we have become so trained. Our brains have become so trained to expect interruptions that if we don't, I'm not saying that you have to start and finish the task in 8.4 minutes. I'm just saying if you don't get to task completion in that segment of 8.4 minutes, your brain is going to invent a reason to make you go, did I remember to call the plumber about that problem with the bathroom? Dang it. Okay, I got to do it right now. Right? I'm not saying don't call the plumber. I don't want your toilet to be backed up for yet another day. Right? I'm just saying this is how our brain is organizing our behavior today in a way that is very different from the way we once engaged with to-dos and communication and activity. What's scarier about these interruptions is that it takes us on average 32 minutes to return to our original task after an interruption by a colleague. So basically, when your coworker calls you and says, I need 5 minutes, she's lying. She's not going to take 5 minutes, right? She might only take 5 minutes, but you won't get back to where you were for 32 minutes, right? And when you interrupt yourself, guess what? You're lying too. So even if that call to the plumber, right, is 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it's going to be 34 minutes on average before you get back to your original task. And there's a 30% chance that you won't resume the task that you interrupted that day at all. So 34 minutes is the average, 30% chance it just, the thread gets lost. And good luck finding it again. Maybe the next day, maybe the day after that. Quick show of hands. Does anybody relate to this? In the way that this shows up in people's experience is not that they know how much time interruptions take. It's that usually they experience it as my office is very reactive, right? Like it feels like we only take action based on the most urgent stuff. Can anybody just show me your blue hand? Wendy, thank you for being honest. Anybody else? You can raise your blue hand or comment in the chat. Just this whole, like, if it's not urgent, we're not even thinking about it. Thank you, Sunny. I've got a lot of yeses in the chat. Great. So you guys are relating to this, and I really appreciate you being honest about how hard this is, because this is scary to admit, right? Now, here's the good news. You're not alone. This is nationwide data. It might even be Western civilization-wide. It might even really be U.S. and Europe and Japan and Australia, even though I think we're particularly blessed with interruption modalities in the U.S. So I want to just let you know, you're not alone. You're not doomed. It's not incurable. And one of the reasons that it is so hard to get out from under it is that it has become culture-wide, right? So we all sort of are shaped by the expectations of easy interruption and immediate response and sort of urgency driving around, crisis and work style. And inside of that, it's really hard to kind of see outside of that culture. And it's really hard. The other piece of this, and we'll talk about this a little later in more depth, is the other piece of this is most people think they're the only ones suffering. They think everybody else, or at least most people, not me, have it figured out, and I don't, right? And one of the really important things about this data and this research that I present is I'm letting you know you're not alone. The whole society is suffering, and we're all sort of like winking at each other, enabling each other, and secretly worried that we're worse than everybody else. And I just want to let you know you're not worse than everybody else. You're totally normal. So, congratulations. Welcome to the club. Now, we're going to talk about a few more terrifying statistics, and then we're going to talk about the biology, and then we'll talk about how to start breaking the patterns. So the first thing, the next piece I want you to understand is, let's say that we're not just talking about interruptions where you actually have to step away from one task to deal with a question about another. Let's say that you're just dealing with a very minimal interruption, right? That doesn't actually pull you out of the task. It just makes you momentarily go, oh, was that my phone going off? Right? Like dismiss. Oh, I can't believe my phone wasn't on silent. Let me put it on silent, that kind of thing. According to research by Eric Altman at Michigan State, and again, lots of research out there about this. This is just my favorite study. One 2.8-second interruption will double our error rates. One 4.4-second interruption will triple our error rates. So, okay, you're not distracted. You've watched the first 20 minutes of Nora's presentation. You're like, all right, I'm not going to actually get back to those people who are asking me questions until I work on this task for 27 minutes. Like, I'm setting a timer, that's it. Oh, but your phone's going off. Guess what? That task that should take you 27 minutes is going to take you 38 minutes because your error rates are going to go up, and it's going to take you longer to get the same work done that you would normally get done if, in a much shorter time if you were undistracted, right? And part of the reason that I talk about this is that there are all these little ways that our productivity is robbed from us across the day, and this is a really important one. And it's so not about how smart you are or how, ambitious or assertive you are. It has everything to do with how much you give your brain the gift of non-distracted experience. The other piece that you should know, and I just want to go back to this. I said earlier, when your colleague says they only need 5 minutes, they're lying. When you tell yourself you're only going to make a 5-minute call, your brain is lying. The brain is really good at lying. The brain was not designed for massive truth and honesty, right? The brain is a survival management system, not an honesty and truth system, right? So the brain lies a lot. Oh, speaking of distractions, someone's calling me. Dismiss. The brain lies a lot. Now I'll double my error rates. The brain lies a lot about multitasking because in point of fact, there's no such thing as multitasking. The only thing that exists for the brain is to rapidly switch from one task to another. And every time you switch tasks, there is a cognitive cost in doing so. We're going to talk about the biological way to perceive that cognitive cost. But first, one more study to scare the pants off you. I apologize. I know most of you aren't even wearing pants. It's COVID, right? You're in your pajamas, you threw a t-shirt on, whatever. So I don't have to scare the pants off you. So I want you to know about one of my favorite studies in this area performed at University of Texas with literally hundreds of college students. So the researchers, led by a guy named Adrian Ward, divided these college students into 3 cohorts. So one cohort had their smartphones outside the room, totally unavailable, totally out of sight, off, could not see them, did not, just locked in the locker very, very far away. So that's cohort 1. Cohort 2, they had their phone in the room, but it was off and in their pocket or in a bag. So they couldn't see the phone, but they knew it was there. Cohort 3, phone off, not on Do Not Disturb, not on silent, completely off, but sitting on the desk in front of them as they took these very simple working memory tests and problem-solving tests. And here's what happened in this research. The people with the phones outside the room had 11% higher scores than people with phone on the desk for working memory, and 7% higher scores than phone on the desk folks for problem solving. But they also had 9% higher scores than people with phones in their pockets or phones in their bags. So even if the phone is off, remember, everybody's got their phones off. Even if the phone is off and you can't see it, but it's next to you, it's still providing more distraction and stealing your brain's cognition than if it were completely out of the room. Right? So you see that the people with the phones outside the room are outperforming both cohorts. And then, of course, the people with the phone in the bag are outperforming the cohort of people with phone on the desk. But the phones are off. Everybody's phones are off. Right? So there's measurable differences across the 3 cohorts. Everybody's phones are off. Here's my favorite part of the study. They administered a survey to all the people after they had taken the test, and every single participant reported feeling as though they were performing at their highest cognitive level during the test. So not only is the mere presence of a turned off phone, and by the way, my phone's on, I'm talking on it, right? So clearly you're not getting Nora at her smartest, right? Not only is the mere presence of the turned off phone stealing your cognition, but it's stealing your cognition without you being aware of it.
Okay, so Nora, we have
Go
a
ahead, Christy.
question that came in from Shara. What if you need your phone for your boss to reach you?
Such a great question. This is why I do these boot camps with teams, whether they're real estate teams or other industries, because the way that we start to shift our behavior has to be team-wide. You can't just be the ops boss who's like, I saw this cool presentation and I'm just going to put my phone on Do Not Disturb and you all, good luck. Like, you can reach me at noon and 5, you know, like, you can't do that. You know you can't do that. I know you can't do that. So we have to actually completely restructure the entire way we communicate. And that's what I did with Kristen Francis, who Christy and I both know. And feel free, Christy, if you wanna if you wanna say anything about that now or later, it's all good.
Well, what I want to say right now is, number one, this will be recorded and come out to you guys. So if your whole team is not with you, feel free to get your team to listen. Number two, if you want to talk to Kristen Francis, reach out to me. She actually, her team, she's a mega team in the Washington, D.C. area. They doubled their production. Kristen is super high D, and I asked her, I'm like, Kristen, like, does this stuff really work? Like, what did it look like with Nora working on your team? She said she promised me immediate results, and I got them, and they doubled their business. So reach out to me if you want that information, and then you've got the link to schedule with Nora. But let's keep going, because I think that's a great.
Yeah, let's keep going.
We can't do it by ourselves as ops bosses.
It's pretty impossible, and this is why the neuroscience is so much fun, is that this is all tribal stuff. Like, the answer to brain problems is tribal solutions, right? Because our brains are actually not built for independent anything. They're really built for tribal success and tribal collaboration, and that's why it always works when we do it in the team, right? And that's why most people, you know, you can find a lot of books out there about distraction. Most people read those books, beat up on themselves, and then fail at implementing any of the great suggestions, right? And that's why I suggest doing these boot camps, because I think they really work.
I love that tribal concept. Those of you who have taken our Systems Are Sexy class, that's always one of the biggest takeaways from the class, is how much better your system can be when you collaborate to build the system. So I love that concept.
Absolutely. And Sheila, thanks so much for putting my my link to my calendar in the chat. Feel free to book stuff on my calendar, guys. Happy to chat with you for half an hour and see what I can create for you guys. Christy, one thing you and I had talked about is, if you think your super high D or super high I team leader is not going to sit through a recording of this, I'm happy to do an intro kind of version of what we're doing right now for your team. Like, that's part of how I get my business, is I'll talk for 45 minutes or an hour about this stuff. With your team leaders on the line, asking me questions, putting me through my paces. And so you don't have to worry about making them sit down and sit through a boring recording. You can actually say, she's willing to do it for us. I just can't do the boot camps for free, because I got to make a living. But, so let's keep going. So basically, am I making a point that we're all addicted to distraction? Probably yes. So now let's talk about the biology, right? So what is your brain actually doing when we're having all these experiences that all these researchers have pointed out with, all this doom and gloom, right? Your brain has to burn glucose to stay focused, specifically oxygenated glucose. Okay. It also burns oxygenated glucose to shift activities. So whenever we rapidly, continually shift, right, that's the multitasking thing, we burn glucose more quickly. And that creates a feeling of exhaustion and depletion in a shorter time. Make sense? So now we're talking about the actual mechanics of your brain, like the car or the computer that it resembles, right? So what happens when our brain glucose gets depleted? Well, our cognitive and physical performance get compromised, anxiety goes up, cortisol goes up, and aggressive and impulsive behavior goes up. Yuck, right? The other thing that happens, and this is the thing that we're all living with, right? Because we're not just living with this one day when I did a lot of task switching and, finished the day much more exhausted than before. We're talking about a sustained pattern of engagement with our world that is fundamentally different from the way we engaged with our world 15 years ago. And what has happened inside this pattern is that we have fallen into what the neuroscience, the neuroscience of addiction people call the dopamine feedback loop. And that was the thing Christy was talking about as it relates to heroin addiction. So when you're a heroin addict and you fall into the dopamine feedback loop, right? When you take that shot of heroin, it gives your brain a big burst of dopamine, right? Which is the pleasure hormone, in case you were curious. And when the high fades, your brain says, where is that? I want more of that. That's what we call a craving when we're studying the neuroscience of addiction, right? Then as you live in your craving, you look for sources of more high. Sometimes you get high again. Sometimes you don't get as much of a high. Sometimes your high falls short. Sometimes your high is mind-blowing. Oh, I'm hearing some background noise. Are we muted? Is everybody muted? I hope. Okay, good. But that experience of intermittent reinforcement of that dopamine positivity, that dopamine pleasure, creates this drive for more and more. And believe it or not, the experience of dopamine you get by checking Facebook to see if anybody liked or commented on your post, right? Or by answering that urgent email from that client that makes you feel so important, that hit of dopamine sucks you into the dopamine feedback loop in the same way that heroin addicts get sucked into heroin addiction. So, the loop itself generates urges that drive us to seek more distraction. When we resist those urges, our brains produce more cortisol. Meaning, let's say you take all this and you go, I'm not going to distract myself as much. I'm going to set timers. I'm not going to look at my email. My Apple Watch can be buzzing. I saw everybody talking about Apple Watches. Yes, your Apple Watch is the same as your phone. It's the exact same thing. I'm going to ignore these buzzes. I am just going to be such a good little sober, distraction sobriety. That's me, right? The more you resist these urges, the more you make a commitment to go cold turkey, the more your brain produces cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. And your brain produces adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone. And by the way, adrenaline actually fogs your mental capacity. It actually makes good decision making harder, right? Because it's trying to get you to focus on one thing, threat, right? So you don't make decisions as well as you might were you not adrenalized. So this is really important for understanding how addictive patterns develop. Feeling bad when you're not using the addictive behavior tricks the brain into doing the addictive behavior much more than any reasonable person would ever choose to do it. That's what an addiction is. Doing something not because you want to do it, but because your experience tells you that you have to. Right? You don't understand, Nora. I have to check my email in case my client, blah, 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 blah. Right? You don't understand, Nora. I have to keep my phone on because I have a teenage daughter who's in therapy and she's really emotional and dramatic and I have to be available for her. Yes, and there are ways to adjust your settings so that she can cut through and no one else can, or she and the teacher and the counselor and the husband can all cut through, So, but what I want you guys to get about this experience in your brain, even before I start solving it for you, is that your experience tells you that you have to in a very particular way. It tells you that you have to by giving you a perception of complexity. And there's two different responses we have to complexity. One is, you don't know how hard I have it, right? I get that a lot, right? People are like, you just don't understand. And I'm like, try me, The other response is minimizing. Well, I can quit anytime. Oh, this is all so dramatic, but I got to get under control. And this is just me, like, quick looking down. Just quick, right? That kind of thing. The I can quit anytime people actually often have a harder time engaging in the structures that are going to solve this than the dramatic folks, right? So if you're more of a drama queen, like, for once, it's going to serve you. For once, you're in a better position, right? Because you can catch yourself in the drama queen thing a little faster than you can in the minimizing, because minimizing is more about denial. Another time we have way more hours to talk about all the layers of denial in the brain. We can get into depth with it, but we don't have to today. So how do we interrupt this addiction-driven complexity loop? Because that's actually how your brain keeps you trapped, right? It tells you, you don't understand, Nora, it's so complex, right? We interrupt it with simplicity. Now, that's all well and good from the, 20,000-foot view, but what on earth do I mean? First of all, it's simple, but it is not by any stretch easy. It can be very uncomfortable. And in fact, I know it can be very uncomfortable because one of the most important influences to how I developed this whole structure is my own personal story. So something you should know about me is that 15 years ago, I almost died of an eating disorder, and Overeaters Anonymous saved my life in January of 2006. I'm so grateful. Yay! I'm so glad to be alive. Yay! And once I wasn't hurting myself with food and eating disorder behavior, I could not keep a job. So I spent 6 months in Overeaters Anonymous, finally getting help for this eating disorder I'd had for 20 years, starting from age 5 and getting into age 25, right? 20 years of hard labor in the eating disorder. And during those 20 years, I managed to be a very sort of stereotypical overachiever, A+ student, Ivy League, magna cum laude grad, worked for the United Nations right out of college, the whole nine, right? As soon as I wasn't burying my feelings in food anymore, I got fired from 3 jobs in 6 months. And after I got fired from the second job in 6 months, a bunch of people said to me, it's very cute that you come to these food addiction meetings, but we think you need this other 12-step program called Debtors Anonymous. It's for people with money and work issues. And I was like, oh, that's not for me. I'm too cool for that. Well, I needed it. One thing that fellowship, that tribe helped me to understand was that I needed to look at my own behavior. Because you'd think 3 jobs in 6 months, you lose, you think there's something wrong with me, right? But I was sure that it was everyone else's fault. When I finally became willing to look at my own behavior, what I saw was that other people, and by the way, this is pre-social media, this is pre-Facebook, other people could check their email or make a personal phone call or go on, an internet site, right, because it's pre-social media, and do it for 5 minutes and then get back to work. But not me. If I checked an email, I would be gone for 2 hours in my personal email doing totally personal things. And because I had learned about how addiction worked by coming to terms with the fact that I had this terrible addiction to things like sugar and brownies and all these things that I was killing myself with, diet pills, it was ugly. It was ugly. I realized that my relationship to a distraction at work was equivalent to my relationship to the things that I used when I was active in my disease with food and eating disorders. So thank goodness, because of the food addiction experience, I knew that I needed a plan, right? The way I achieved sobriety with food, because you can't stop eating, is that I had a meal plan. I had a food plan that I gave to my sponsor every morning. And what I learned to do, what I sort of invented for myself, is I invented a distraction abstaining plan for one day, because I knew I could only do anything one day. And for the very first day of the next job I got, after those getting fired from 3 jobs in 6 months, for the very first day of that next job, I called a friend and said, just for today, no personal email, internet, or phone calls during work hours from 9 to 5:30. And I got to tell you, when I actually walked in and they said, welcome, here's your stack of training and work stuff, good luck, and it should be self-explanatory. You can read, have fun. When I actually moved from task 1, they were all very easy tasks. When I actually moved from task 1 to task 2 and had the impulse, check your email, see who loves you, right? And said, no, I told Beth I wasn't going to do it. I told my friend, and actually reached for the second task. I was shocked at the physical pain that arose. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had only ever felt pain like this before, once in my life, and it was when I was getting what we call abstinent from my eating disorder. So I knew it must be good pain, right? I was like, this must be good. And I danced with that pain all day. By the end of the day, I had finished all of the work. I had asked for more. I kept doing it. I said, this really worked. I felt exhilarated. I felt like a gladiator. I said, I got to do this again. I called the same lady the next morning. I said, I'm making the same commitment. We'll see how it goes. On the third day of doing this commitment, my boss at this new job said, okay, that was all the work we were going to give you for the first 3 months. So we're going to promote you. And I was like, whoa, this is powerful, right? This was an executive recruiting job, in case you're curious as to like what industry I was in. And within 6 months, I was the #1 recruiter in the firm. 9 months in, I had been promoted to vice president. I started as a researcher. I got promoted to associate director and then vice president within 9 months. So things were changing. Now, here's the other thing that happened. The very first time I went to a 12-step meeting to share about it, right, to this 12-step group for people with money and work issues, and I said, I made this commitment that I'm not going to do, just thinking like, oh, I'm just sharing about my process. And I said, I'm not going to do these 3 things during the work. I made this commitment to my sponsor, blah, blah, blah. And the whole room went like this. Oh, like, oh, the humanity, right? And they came up to me after, and a lot of people, and they said, what did you do? That's crazy. Oh, God, I could never do that. And I said, okay, this is probably important. Now, when I look back on all the time and energy I spent trying to understand how much I was losing to distraction in 2006, I realized that all I was a trendsetter, right? I was losing 4 to 6 hours a day in 2006 when most people were still only losing 2 or 3 hours a day. If I were a 25-year-old trying to be employed in today's world, losing 4 to 6 hours a day, I'd be normal. I would have never gotten fired from 3 jobs in 6 months. I'm so grateful that my problems were so much more advanced than everyone else's, because it put me at an advantage to be forced to solve it early. And in point of fact, it was giving away that discovery and sharing it with others, first in the 12-step tribe, and then in a larger and larger and larger pool that turned into my business 11 years ago. Because this was 06, 07, people started paying me to talk to me about this stuff in 09, basically. So I just want to let you know, like, when I tell you this stuff, I'm not telling you stuff that I know because I'm so smart, right? I know this stuff because I've lived it. I know this stuff because I had to figure it out of desperation, and I'm just so blessed that my desperation has transformed into opportunities to serve. And I just really so appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today and share this with you. So now we're going to talk about ways to solve it. Are you excited? Are you excited for solutions? Yay! What was the other 12-step program? Debtors Anonymous. Good job, Kristen Purcell. Yeah, I'm a big 12-stepper. I think all the 12-step programs are fantastic. All right, what was the other? I just want to see anybody else. Do people, something about glucose, I keep missing it. Do some people have more glucose than others? Yes. If you eat more, you'll have more glucose. If you drink more coffee, you'll have more something, caffeine really. So if you, eat certain kinds of food, you'll have better glucose. If you eat, junk food, you'll have not as good glucose. So, this is a physical experience. It's not all mental. It's not all behavioral. And being able to really honor the fact that you deserve to be like well cared for, right, in all the ways, is a really important part of it too. So now let's talk about
let me just jump in there, because those of you who are our coaching clients know that we coach the whole person. That's one of the reasons why we coach the whole person and not just the business side. If you're not physically healthy, you're not going to have what you need to do a great job. Your brain doesn't have what you need. Your heart doesn't have what you need, all of those things. So I love that you say that. You're right in line with us, Nora. Thank you.
Yay. And also, I just want to say, God makes every human being beautiful, right? Beauty comes in every shape and size. This is not about, being that cool Instagram model or something. This is about, choosing to put healthy things in our bodies and honoring our bodies. That's all it's about, Every one of you is gorgeous. I'm enjoying looking at every one of your beautiful faces, right? This is not a beauty contest, you know? It's all about care, you know? So let's talk about the 3-minute bridge. That's the first thing I want you to take away from today. So the 3-minute bridge is something I invented when I was first starting out with my little distraction abstaining plan. And I realized that in switching from one task to another, when I first started abstaining from these impulses or listening to the impulse without actually giving into it, it took me about 3 minutes of intense discomfort. From the time I picked up a task that was, for whatever reason, a difficult or triggering task, from the time I picked up the task to the time I had achieved a sense of deep flow and ease with the task. And that 3 minutes was very livable, and even much more livable once I realized that it was only 3 minutes long. But here's the thing I discovered probably within the first few days of trying this weird thing I tried in 2007 that turned into, you know, all the other wacky cool stuff that I ended up doing research and blah, 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 thousands of people, blah, blah. The thing I noticed about the 3-minute bridge is that if for some reason I got interrupted before I had dropped into the flow of doing, the 3-minute clock would reset. And I believe that that's why people spend hours feeling a little tortured about so many different tasks. I believe that's why most people think of themselves as having some tasks they enjoy and some tasks they don't enjoy. Because when you have whatever the list of tasks you don't enjoy is, when you know you don't enjoy it, you're more likely to feel a little more uncomfortable, a little more edgy, a little more kind of fidgety in your seat. And guess what you're most likely to do to take the edge off of that discomfort? Any guesses? You're gonna distract. You're gonna check your phone. You're gonna just make sure that that email isn't really, really important, right? And every time you distract, that 3-minute bridge resets. And I've seen people spend a decade in the 3-minute bridge, right? Spend a decade being uncomfortable, avoiding and procrastinating and only getting a little bit done on some big project that really matters to them, but they can get away with procrastinating, like, I don't know, writing their screenplay or writing their novel, right? Often that's like the place where this shows up the most, right? But it shows up at work all the time. Here's the other thing you should know about the 3-minute bridge. If you practice it a lot, not only do you learn that it's only 3 minutes, you only have to pay 3 minutes of discomfort in exchange for a joyful sense of flow doing any task in the world. Like your most hated, most annoying, most tedious, most boring, most terrifying task becomes pleasurable if you don't interrupt for the first 3 minutes. But the magic is that that 3 minutes gets shorter. So within a couple of weeks, back in 2007 when I first discovered this, my 3-minute bridge was no longer 3 minutes, it was 1 minute. Within a few months, it was 30 seconds. These days, it's about 15 seconds if it shows up at all. And when I work with teams and I teach them about the 3-minute bridge, by the end of the 3 weeks, most people only have a 1-minute bridge at longest, at most. Now, one thing to remember is that trauma affects our sense of discomfort, safety, and threat. Because the 3-minute bridge actually comes from a very reasonable neuroscientific set of evolutionary principles in our bodies. Do I have a little picture for it? Let's find out. I don't remember if I have a picture. Nope. Okay, so I'll just tell you. So I want you to imagine the 300,000 years that all our ancestors spent living off the land, right, as hunter-gatherers, right? I want you to imagine what it was like for someone who looked like you, but, you know, lived in a very different situation, who had to go out and gather berries. Let's say you gathered all the berries from all the bushes that are near your cave, and you have to go out to a farther, you know, a clearing farther away from your cave. What's the first thing you're going to do when you go to this clearing that's not as familiar to you, that's not as close to where all the other people in the tribe are? You're going to case the joint, right? You're going to look around the clearing, make sure there's no wild boars hiding in the bushes, right? And it's going to take you about 3 minutes to make sure there are no threats. And then Once your body has done what it needs to do to make sure that there are no threats, you're going to relax, right? And your hypervigilance is going to get just a little bit calmer, and you're going to start getting to work and picking berries, right? But we don't live in that world anymore, right? And so our society has evolved past our biology. Our biology, that 3 minutes of discomfort, that's just hypervigilance. That's just healthy survival, that your biology is still running. So you can actually be gentle and kind to your body about it. You don't have to be like, I hate the 3-minute bridge. Nora was right, but it sucks, right? You can actually like, hello, survival management, good job, right? And I really encourage you to be really warm and kind to your body because it's really doing its best, And so the thing that I want to tell you about how the 3-minute bridge can change over time is that if you have a big trauma, like for instance, my mom passed away in January of this year, not from COVID, because it was before COVID had really hit. She passed away from leukemia. I noticed that the month after she passed away, my 3-minute bridge went back up. So instead of 15 seconds, it was closer to a minute, right? Because you lose a parent, doesn't feel so good, right? So our bodies are very real perception machines that are taking in inputs and putting out outputs, and it's good to honor that about our bodies, right? It's good to honor the fact that we really do think and process from our heads to our toes, okay? So any more questions about the 3-minute bridge before we go on? I see stuff in the chat box. Wow, virtual hug. Elizabeth says, I'm her favorite person. Yay! I'll take it. Awareness of the discomfort. Yes, great for personal tasks. Yes. Buffy, way to go. Test it with laundry. I love it. Great for prayer. Yes, 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 yes. Good, good, good. COVID is a total trauma, Stephanie. Great point. Our world has been turned upside down. I'm sure we all have like 3.5-minute bridges at least right now, right? It's a really tough time. Absolutely. And it's a fascinating situation because we're having a society-wide or even a planet-wide trauma, right? So what's cool about a planet-wide trauma is that we can have so much compassion for each other, right? And we can find so much common ground, right? Whereas like maybe a year or 2 years ago, it would have been really hard to be like, well, I don't know, that weirdo Nora, she's over there in Manhattan thinking she's so fancy, I'm over here in like Wisconsin, like, with the cows, like what do we have in common, right? And I'd be like, well, I'm from Louisiana, so I know my way around some cows, but like also, hey, we're all in this together, right? And therefore we can really remember that we have this shared humanity. I hope. Awesome. Okay, let's keep going. Samantha says it's a crutch. It can be a crutch. It can. Yeah, I'm really big into easy does it, but do it, right? Compassion and action, right? So how do we let's talk now about how we deal with a team, right? When we're dealing with teams, this is true for individuals, but it's even more true for teams. When we're dealing with teams, we really have to create a planned approach to our work tasks. And it's really crucial to make the most of what I call batch processing in the brain, right? Because work moves faster without interruptions or task switching, and it's way more pleasurable when we're interrupted less. Are we going to completely banish interruptions from our workday? No, we're not. Can we gently kind of group them into allotted times? Yes, we can. I don't believe we can group them into just noon and 5. I do think we need interruptions. Like, I do think we need to like time to deal with interruptions every 1 to 3 hours, depending on the situation, depending on the team. I've developed so many of these structures for so many different teams, and I've just found that the magic comes when it's actually something that we're tweaking and experimenting with, right? Because we want to really liberate people from this slow, low pleasure, low quality, mistake-prone experience of interrupted work where we're losing 4 to 6 hours a day, right? And what's remarkable is it really only takes 3 to 6 weeks to completely transform how the team works. And I just want to like really reassure you and say your clients will still feel like they're getting very prompt service. If anything, they'll feel like your responses are more prompt because you'll be able to have this allotted way that you check for things every 60, 90, 120 minutes. You'll have very particular ways you put things into settings. It'll just add to that sort of system approach that Christy is so great at teaching you guys. Let's keep going. Okay, now I've got case studies. So before we go to case studies, does anyone else have questions? It looks like Susan has a great question, which I would love to answer. Susan, do you want to, is it okay if we let Susan talk? Because I feel like this is a really,
yes. Can one of you guys?
Great. Susan, you want to come off mute?
Unmute yourself.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can.
I was not expecting to be on Zoom today.
Oh, I'm wearing my pajamas, girl. I just threw on a sweater. You're good.
It just popped into my head, Nora, and thank you for doing this, by the way. Thank you, Christy. But it seems to me that I totally see that it's a tribe thing, that you have to get everybody on board in order for everybody to be as efficient as they can be and to support one another. And, you know, we talk a lot about that, supporting one another with our goals, all that kind of stuff. But it almost seems like it extends far beyond work, that it's everybody in your life, your family, your friends, everybody that needs to understand your process of focus to be efficient in your life, because we're not just trying to be efficient at work. We're trying to be efficient with the time we have at home to accomplish those tasks, all that kind of stuff. How do you get around everybody in your world being a part of this class?
So here's the good news. You only need your work team to actually be on the same page as you. Everybody else, when you check for distractions every 60 to 90 minutes or every 1 to 3 hours, everybody else doesn't notice the difference. Because if you were in the bathroom when they called and you just happened to miss their call or whatever, and then you notice it an hour later, you'd be like, oh, so sorry I missed your call, right? And they'd be like, oh, okay, no worries, right? So in point of fact, you don't have to like go out and proselytize and evangelize, you know? You just, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to convert people to like neuroscientism or something, right? You just have to learn, and this is what I teach so often is, yeah, you just have to learn how to like make it sound like you're still part of the culture while actually carving out this ability to really own your time in a whole new way, right? And I will say that when I do this boot camp, I have all these videos I have people watch. Like, it's a pretty intense experience. I don't just teach about the distractions. I also teach about like deeper neuroscientific and behavioral stuff that I've invented and been teaching for years. And that helps a lot because oftentimes the things that block us have almost nothing to do with willpower or being a good student or being someone with a lot of focus or a little bit of focus. They have a lot more to do with communication and human behavior and human collaboration dynamics that just go much deeper. And so having those skill sets available to us as we've refigured this is really crucial, because so much of the solutions I end up helping people come up with over those 3 to 6 weeks are behavioral solutions, right? How to communicate, how to problem solve when these things come up, because it's not going to be an if, it's going to be a when. I'll also say that I always, and I know Christy's like, hey, Nora, it's almost 4 o'clock, we got to get going. I always give everyone who's participating in the boot camp the opportunity to show the videos to everyone they live with. So if you have teenagers at home, if you have spouses at home, like whoever you live with, you're not just going to be sharing about the distraction pieces, you're also going to be sharing about the behavioral pieces and the way that our brains literally perceive the exact same words as having completely opposite meanings depending on stuff that's going on in our brains that I try to make, you know, approachable. So that tends to be a really fun bonus when people call me and they're like, I showed these videos to my husband and like, oh my God, our communication is so much better. You may have saved my marriage, right? And I'm like, oh, that's nice, you know. So it's nice. And I do think it's very workable. Christy, can I go through, what do you want to do? We've got 1 minute left.
I don't know what your time schedule is. I want to wrap up for anyone who needs to go at 4 o'clock. If you...
Oh, Christy, you just muted.
Yeah, I don't know.
There you go.
Somebody muted me. if you have 5 extra minutes to do questions and to finish up, that would be awesome. But I know people may
Absolutely.
have to go at 4 o'clock if you have to go. And if Nora, you have time, let's keep going.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let me just run through case studies real quick. And Lisa says, what do you want us to do to change the distractions? It has to do with creating a plan across the team and then tweaking the plan. And oftentimes what that looks like is a call in the morning. Like there's a bunch of like sort of prep work for it, learning how to do it, learning how to put the plan together, learning how to make exceptions when the exceptions happen, when they don't happen, watching all my fancy videos, and then doing a morning call either 5 mornings a week or 3. I get involved 3 times a week, but you guys do it without me 2 times a week. That we kind of figure it out depending on each situation. And thank you, Sheila, again, for putting up my calendar link. Feel free to book a time on my calendar. It's totally, totally, totally like my gift to you, half an hour. We can talk about all the more, specific stuff. So quadruple closed deals in 8 weeks. This is Dave Edwards. He's actually a financial, advisor, wealth manager. He started implementing this stuff. It was amazing to watch, right? His whole firm just transformed, got so much more efficient. Quadruple closed deals in 8 weeks. This is Kristen Francis. What does it mean for Kristen and her team? At the time, they were an 8-person team. I'm pretty sure they're bigger now. What did they do to double productivity? How did we measure that? Well, when I met them, they were so busy. They were closing about 8 deals a month, and they were working till about midnight or 1 a.m., 2 or 3 or 4 nights a week. By the end of our 3-week boot camp, they were all done with work completely at 7 p.m. every night, with breaks for like school pickups and stuff, because most of them are like suburban moms who had to like take a break and around 3 o'clock to pick up kids from school. And they didn't just maintain those 8 deals a month and reduce their workload. They actually massively increased their deals. So the following month after we did this boot camp, exactly that next month, they doubled their closed deals. So they closed 16 deals in the following month, only working about, half the time. So it really was a really measurable example of what happens when we get back these 4 to 6 hours a day that we lose. And as Christy said, you can talk to Christy and get Kristen Francis's info.
Yeah, feel free to reach
Kristen's
out to me, because I think what would be interesting is it wasn't the ops people on Kristen's team that were raving about this. It was the sales people on the team, which is fascinating to me, because I know us as ops bosses, we get it. We're statistics. We're like, you interrupt us, it's 2.4 seconds and whatever, and we can quote all the statistics you want, but that's not going to get the buy-in of your salespeople. So have your salespeople talk to her salespeople and just reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate.
Absolutely. And then my third case study is this lady, Diana File. She was an independent consultant, so she wasn't dealing with teams, but just, implementing these behavioral tools that I teach, as well as the distraction tools. She was able to triple her income in 6 weeks. So that's basically the essence of the presentation. Let's see. Elena asks, how does someone checking their phone during a team meeting affect the productivity of everyone else at the team meeting? Well, it's gonna do lots of things, right, Elena? It's gonna mean that for those moments when they're checking their phone, they have no idea what anyone else has said, right? Because there's no such thing as multitasking. So whatever's been going on, right? Rochelle wants to know, how about a boot camp? Book a time on my calendar, and we can talk about it. And thank you, Sheila, for posting my calendar link again. You're awesome. So they're not gonna know what people are talking about. They're probably, and I know I'm guilty of this. And Leo's like, yes, I would love to do boot camp. Great, book a time on my calendar. We can talk about it. I'm guilty of this. I'm willing to bet most people on this Zoom are guilty of it. Have you ever kind of like zoned out, right? I'm holding up the phone, zone out, zone back in, and then you're like, pretend that you know what people are talking about, right? Like you want to kind of blend in, like you're like, oh, I'll get the gist. People just blather on anyway, right? And you can get away with that at least some of the time, because probably a third of the other people were zoning out anyway, right? And things get repeated. But what would happen if no one was zoning out? how much faster, how much more thoughtful, how much more considered would decisions be, right? And, we're all a little addicted to this stuff. So one of the things I like to do with the meetings piece is to be like, hey guys, are we all, do we need a distraction break? Does everybody need 3 minutes to check their phone? Setting the timer, go, right? So it's not that I want you to become some temperance movement, like distractions are evil kind of person, right? It's much more that we're trying to bring the secrets out of, bring it out of secrecy and into real obvious, hey, we need these distractions at least a little bit. We probably don't need them as much as we think we do, but yeah, we all need to make sure we can check our phones. So let's do a distraction break, ready, go, right? And then you come back and, yay, Susan, thank you, everybody. You come back and you're more present. So there's just so much that's available to us when we really allow the neuroscience to liberate us from the shame and blame, because a lot of the reason this stuff gets perpetuated is that there's so much shame and blame. There's so much of this I'm probably worse than everybody else, and I don't want to ask for what I need, and besides, do I even know what I need, and oh my gosh, if I were better, and if they were smarter, and oh gosh, and they haven't caught on to me yet, and they don't know how bad I am, and blah, 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 blah. And when you really get that there's no shame here because it's the whole society, right? Facebook and Netflix have neuroscientists working for those companies that do not care about how much money you make, that do not care about how much undivided attention your children receive from you, right? They only care about how long they get to trap your eyeballs on their platform. I don't work for Facebook or Netflix. I care about how much money you make. I care about your kids getting a present mom and a present dad. That's what I care about. So let's rock and roll. Let's revolutionize. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Amen to that. It's not about, amen to that. I can't even say it any better. I want to thank all of you guys for being here. Encourage you guys to reach out to Nora. She's in terms of the boot camp, I think some of the messages I'm getting privately are, it's not a boot camp where just one person signs up. She actually comes in and co-creates with you and your team a 3-week plan to move through this. And it's just like our coaching at OpsBoss, where we're coaching directors of operations and COOs and EAs. And your role is different on every team. So we don't coach exactly the same to each role. Her boot camp is very much similar to that. So reach out for her to this. And if you guys are not participating in our monthly masterminds and speakers and you want to, then take one of our classes, sign up for group coaching, sign up for one-on-one coaching, reach out to me for that if you need information, or you can go to our website. I think we posted that in the comments. And I hope you guys have a great distraction-free holiday with your family and walk into an awesome new year. So thanks for being with us.
Leave those phones in the other room. Just leave your phone in the other room and see what magic happens. That's the simplest thing for Christmas Day. Just see what happens. Just leave the phone alone. Just see what happens.
We don't need Santa. Just get rid of the phone. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. Bye, guys.